Yeah, sure. My name's Andrea Miller. I'm the Rural Action Sustainable Forestry Program Manager. We're a membership-based community nonprofit. We work to uplift our community through, sustainable forestry, sustainable agriculture, and social enterprise economic development. We're located in Athens, Ohio, but we serve all of Appalachia, Ohio.
Cool. Thank you, Andrea. And Karam, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about the work that you're doing with agroforestry with Rural Action?
Sure. So my name is Karam Sheban, and I am the Director of Sustainable Forestry. So I work on the same team as Andrea, and we're doing a lot of the same work. Like you mentioned, agroforestry is a big part of what we do. And so our sustainable forestry program is working with private landowners across the region to help develop agroforestry strategies for sustainable income generation, but also for ecosystem benefits, thinking about things like biodiversity across private forest land and combating things like forest fragmentation and giving people options that allow them to make a choice if they're not interested, for example, in something like timber harvesting, to still be able to generating a product off of their land for a variety of reasons and benefits. So that's kind of the bulk of what we do in a nutshell.
Great. We're super grateful to be able to be connected with both of you because we want to learn exactly what you are trying to promote, which is promoting biodiversity and potential economic opportunities with forested land. At St. Paul's, we're not as interested in generating revenue as we are in producing beneficial crops for the community, foods, and beneficial experiences, and to maybe inspire the next generation to maybe explore different forest farming possibilities in their own land. So cool. Well,
Awesome.
The first question, you kind of spoke to it, Karam, but maybe just a little bit more detail about, what is forest farming? You shared a lot in your intro, but is there anything more just like in the general question there?
Yeah. So I think you can just very broadly think of forest farming as using the natural shade created by a forest canopy to create a conducive environment to grow crops of sort of your choosing. And so when we're talking about forest farming, we're mostly talking about native forest plants, shrubs, and understory herbs that in their natural habitat grow in a shady environment. And so you're utilizing that shade to create the right conditions to cultivate plants that you're interested in. And that's kind of what makes forest farming different than just, say, having wild populations of American ginseng or ramps or variety of native plants that you can also forest farm. Forest farming means, well, you're actually making an intentional effort to cultivate those plants, either by, broadcasting seeds or transplanting actual plants into that environment. And so that's kind of a big distinction. We work with people that are also wild harvesting plants from natural populations and replanting berries from those populations to create new populations. So it could take a lot of forms, but really, forest farming is sort of the active manipulation of a forest site to achieve your goals, whatever they might be. And maybe they're economic, maybe it's just for personal use, or it's a hobby, or it's for biodiversity. So lots of different kind of perspectives that live underneath that umbrella.
Cool. Thank you. Andrea, was there anything that you wanted to add to that?
No, that was great. Yeah, it's a really great synopsis. I would just add farming in the shade.
Yeah. Yeah, farming in the shade. So with that spirit, the items that we're looking at cultivating at St. Paul's, we've purchased pawpaws and persimmons, since those grow in the understory. And then along the edges, we were thinking about serviceberry and elderberry. And then we're really interested in learning from you guys, because you guys are sort of the ginseng and medicinal forest herb experts. I've been reading your book, Farming in the Forest, that you put together about the medicinal herbs. Karam, weren't you one of the main people that wrote that, Farming in the Forest?
Is this the Forest Farmer's Handbook? Is that the one
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
referring
the
to?
Forest Farmers
Yeah.
Handbook. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I helped put that together. It was
yeah.
a team
Uh-huh,
effort.
uh-huh. So I guess I wanted to just hear your thoughts on your recommendations for growing those specific crops that I mentioned.
Andrea, you want to start things off?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of the NTFPs are what we call them, non-timber forest products that come from the forest that are not timber. We refer to all of those plants in the Forest Farmer's Handbook as NTFPs. Generally speaking, they all have really similar propagation methods and site requirements. An ample amount of shade, well-drained soil, but also that can retain a little bit of moisture, typically on sloped sites that are north, northeast, or east facing. You could do seed production. You could also propagate via rhizome. It really just depends on what you want to do and what you want to experiment with, and what sources have readily available. So that's kind of a huge thing as well. What do nurseries have available? What planting stock is available in the market? But if we want to start with a specific plant, I'm happy to go that route. Or did you want to talk about ginseng and golden seal first?
Sure. Yeah, we should go there since I know that you guys do a lot with both of those crops.
Cool. Yeah, Karam, do you want to talk about ginseng?
Sure. So like Andrea said, I think, the most important thing when you're interested in cultivating these understory medicinals is to really identify an appropriate site. And unlike, we call it farming in the shade, and I think that is on the one hand a really useful way to think about what forest farming is. On the other hand, a big difference between forest farming and your sort of standard farming or gardening is that in your gardening, you're making a lot of modifications to the growing environment to like make it appropriate for what you're going to grow. You're putting down soil maybe in a raised bed, and you are irrigating and maybe fertilizing and all these things. With the forest farm, you actually want to go out and just identify a site that is going to provide the right conditions so that these plants will thrive on their own. And it can be, if you do this step right, it can make forest farming a really low labor, low cost endeavor, because the plants are where they want to be and they're happy and they're doing their thing. And so, like Andrea said, those sites tend to be, you'll hear them referred to as mesic sites. And all mesic means is moist. It means that soil is retaining a good amount of soil moisture, and the plants are going to have a lot of water readily available. And that means, in our part of the world, it means north and east facing slopes. And the reason for that is that that sort of direction is going to get the cooler morning sun as opposed to the hotter afternoon sun. And then that has this whole cascading effect on soil conditions. And so that less sun means less evaporation of soil moisture. And you'll also notice, if you can get out into your woods and start to check out these different sites, that it also means different species, different tree species. And so on your drier sort of south and west facing slopes, you'll find an overstory that's oak and hickory, whereas your cooler northeast facing slopes, you'll find things like sugar maple and tulip poplar and black walnut and beech. So that cascading effect goes all the way down to the understory. There's more moisture available. And these plants have co-evolved with the canopy species I just mentioned, the sugar maple, the basswood, the black walnut. And so that's where they're happiest growing. And the reason that a slope is advantageous is because that allows for the water on that site to sort of run on the subsurface of the soil. So you're not getting pooling, swampy conditions, which can lead to fungal issues with the plants. So you've got a north and east facing slope. And then the next step is to look for indicator species. And I just named some of the overstory, the tree species that you'd be looking for. And then there's a whole host, and we have a lot of great resources on our website, kind of detailing all these indicator species. So I would say anyone listening to this recording doesn't need to try to like remember all of this. It should be in the handbook, for example, the Forest Farmer's Handbook, and lots of other places. But you're looking for things like spice bush and other companion herbs, trilliums, black and blue cohosh, and especially sites that have a lot of diversity in the understory are sort of telling you, hey, this is a place where herbs are happy and they're doing well. So I know I just spent a lot of time on that, but that's a really important step. You can't just go check your ginseng seeds into the woods anywhere, and then if they don't grow, feel like you failed at forest farming. This is a really critical step.
Yeah.
So when it comes to ginseng, you can start with ginseng because it's probably the easiest to get in terms of planting stock for these understory medicinals. You've identified your site, and the next step would be to go and purchase ginseng seed. There's lots of places where you can do that. Rural Action sells ginseng seed annually. And so we can definitely share our website with folks. We're happy to, and we can also direct you to other reputable sellers where you can get ginseng seed. And you've got your seed, you've got your site. The best time to plant is in the fall. That's when the plants would naturally be, their berries ripen and they're going to drop those berries. And so the fall, when there's leaf litter on the ground, really between the time when you've got leaf litter on the ground and when the soil starts to freeze, that's sort of your window for planting. And really all you need to do is you need to take those seeds, you need to brush back the leaf litter. Ideally, you don't have to, but that definitely helps. And then broadcast seed. And they, the idea is roughly maybe 4 seeds per square foot is a good number to just have in your mind, thinking that you might have roughly 50 to 25% germination or establishment. And so long-term, it's like a plant per square foot. That's a pretty natural distribution of plants on the landscape. You broadcast those seeds and then you brush the leaf litter back on top, and that's it. And that's kind of what we call wild simulated forest farming. So you're basically introducing that plant into the environment, but then you're stepping away and letting the plant grow as if it's a wild plant. And so with any of these understory medicinals, so this goes for ginseng, it goes for, what else did we mention? Golden seal, ramps. You can use this technique if you have seeds to cultivate those plants. And like Andrea said, the site kind of conditions that I just mentioned for ginseng, golden seal is going to be happy there. Ramps are going to be happy there. Bloodroot, lots of these plants, they might have slight differences in what they like and what they can tolerate, but there's a lot of overlap. And the process would be very similar if you were transplanting a root instead of growing from seed. It's just going to be a little more labor intensive. You're going to have to get down on your hands and knees, brush back that leaf litter, dig yourself a little hole to put the root in the ground. And in the handbook actually has some really great diagrams. We had an artist that helped us put this together and that show, just how deep, for example, you want to plant the root and like identifying the sort of growing bud where it's going to put next year's growth out from. And so I would say referring to those diagrams can be helpful if you're trying to figure out, I don't want to bury this thing 3 feet under the ground. So that's a little overview. I hope that wasn't too long, too much information.
I think it's great. That was great. It's very helpful. That was great. So what about other crops like understory trees, such as pawpaw and persimmon? That is extremely helpful when thinking about the medicinal herbs, but what about woody species?
Yeah,
Andrea?
so the pawpaws, definitely want to give them ample access to sunlight. They don't need full sun, but they tend to thrive really well if you think of like a power line clearing that's going through a forest or like along the edge of a stream or a river, somewhere where they have access to ample moisture and a good bit of sunlight. They tend to not fruit at all when they're completely covered by shade. They'll germinate, a seed will germinate and they'll sprout and they'll grow, but they'll never really reach fruit producing size. So they do best on the edge of a forest. Persimmons, in my experience, they do really well in open field settings, ridge tops, fields. They like full sun. They're very slow growing, but they can grow on the edge of a forest as well. They just need access to a good bit of sunlight. But again, they're really slow growing. So if you are going to plant those, I would maybe protect them with some sort of caging or like a tree tube. Because a lot of times people will plant them in their fields and then they'll just mow over them because they're just so slow growing that they, forget they plant them or they just don't see it. So giving it some protection so not only you can see it, but you're also protecting it from deer browse and other plants or other animals as well.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. Good words. And then
and one more thing.
Yeah.
You should plant a few of them. They have male and like the males and female trees are separate from one another. So just make sure you plant a few, that way they can cross pollinate and produce fruit.
Okay, cool. And then have you worked with anybody that's had any success with growing elderberry? Elderberry usually is part shade. It's more productive in full sun, but I just was wondering if you guys have ever worked with any forest farmers that have had any success with pretty shady site conditions in elderberry.
Yeah, so we're actually we've been having a lot of conversations at Rural Action about elderberry recently. It's a crop that we've done a lot of like one-off projects, but we haven't really developed much programming around. And so I would say let's definitely stay in touch because we'll probably be learning a lot more soon about that particular crop. I do know that it's one that, like, when it comes to commercial production, people are really like have taken it out of those riparian environments and are growing it in kind of an orchard environment.
Yeah.
And as is true for pawpaw, for persimmon, like a lot of the fruit producing plants, that fruit production really is tied to the overall amount of photosynthate that the plant can get. And so, like, even though they might grow and survive in shady conditions, having a little more sunlight does create just gives them a boost of energy to produce the fruit, if that's what you're really interested in. That's also true with elderberry, but I do know that they were really interested in exactly the question that you asked, which is like, are there ways to both have introduced the plant into riparian areas and still have fruit production at a level that could be, if not necessarily commercial, because maybe that's not everybody's interest, enough for personal consumption or to make value added products. Right. And I do know that they have introduced a number of improved varieties, like cultivars of elderberry. And in particular, I know that there's an organization based in, I think they're based out of Madison, Wisconsin, but they work in the upper Midwest, called the Savannah Institute. And they have done a lot of work on elderberries and around these improved cultivars. And so, and I think depending on that, it's like moving in the direction of something like apples, where depending on how you want to grow the plant, there's a cultivar that responds particularly well. So I wouldn't be surprised, but I can't say for sure, if there was a cultivar that was able to, yield higher fruit production under shadier conditions. And so that's something to consider. And again, I think that might be based on your goals. And that's like, there's no one size fits all forest farming. It really is like, what are your goals? And that's got to be your starting point. And if your goal is, for example, maybe more oriented around, riparian, maybe stream bank stabilization or a water quality thing, and you're really interested in sort of native species, well, maybe you want to just take cuttings from the wild elderberry plants that are growing in your, in your area that are already doing well, and you want to plant those, and your fruit production might be, moderate. But for someone that is more interested in the fruit, maybe going the direction of buying one of these improved cultivars and planting those could be a good option for you. Like, I know, for example, that those cultivars, one thing that they've done is they've gotten the plants to the point where they fruit synchronously. So like a normal, a wild elderberry plant is going to fruit within a certain window of time, but they don't fruit all at the same time. And that's a strategy that the plants evolved to partly to, work around predation. These improved varieties will fruit at the same time. It's convenient for people that want to harvest the fruits. And so I think there's increasingly opportunities for people that are really interested in maybe higher fruit production to buy this improved planting stock and go that direction.
Yeah, interesting. Cool. I'm familiar. A few people have recommended that I connect with the Savannah Institute, and I've emailed them a little bit. Yeah, and I'm interested in learning together about different cultivars that might be productive in terms of fruit in shadier conditions. So are there other potentially berry species that might be recommended for heavily shaded sites that are riparian? The St. Paul's Forest has a creek that runs through it, and it was overgrown with honeysuckle. The soil is very, very alkaline, heavy clay, and we've removed a lot of honeysuckle, and we want to put beneficial species, ideally perennial edible crops that are beneficial to humans and to wildlife. One of the goals of the Elder Tree, which is the nonprofit environmental education organization that I've been developing, that's also partnering with St. Paul, where I also happen to attend church, is one of the goals for that organization is for it to become financially stable and not to be dependent on donations in order to be operating. So we would like to have something where we could have something like elderberry syrup or elderberry tea, like value added products to keep the organization running, so that we don't need to charge everybody to do an environmental education program. So, but we're also equally interested in land stewardship and just making sure that the ecological integrity of the site is maintained. So those were kind of, so other berries that might be potential sources for creative value added products like gooseberry or aronia berry or serviceberry. These are all Midwestern plants that I've been trying to learn about, and I wasn't sure what you guys might recommend.
Well, I'll defer to Andrea here. I feel like you might know more about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, those are all great options, and they are edible and they're good, but they do require a little bit more sunlight. I don't think they would thrive super well in full shade. The only thing that I'm really thinking of is potentially spice bush. The unripe berries, when they're in the green form, they taste a lot like black pepper. So it can be used as like a black pepper substitute. When they're red and ripe, they tend to have more of an allspice like flavor, hence the name, common name Appalachian allspice. And the leaves and twigs can also be used in teas as well, and they're also medicinal. So that's really the only one that comes to mind. I think some of our native plums would require more sun as well. Karam, can you think of anything other than spice bush that would produce a berry other than elderberry?
Not really. I think you kind of hit
Yeah.
on some good up. But spice bush is a good thought. And I mean, I don't know if I know anybody. I'm going to put in the chat just the link to this, to Integration Acres, which is local to near to the Athens area. And they found a market for this crop. I don't know anybody else that's necessarily doing this, but it's a great. I think that is also an aspect of forest farming is getting creative about marketing. A lot of our educational kind of events and stuff, our conferences will often sort of feature some workshops or classes around creative marketing, because that's definitely part of it. But I think something like elderberry syrup is a great example of how it can be really successful, and markets can definitely emerge around these crops. So spice bush berry could be an interesting one if you sort of pitch it in the right way, and that definitely will produce berries in the shade. So
And where you're located too, you're in Dayton, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
I think you would have really great market access, because there's more than, and I don't know this for sure, but I would say more than likely there's probably not a lot of people over there selling spice bush berries in whatever form that may take.
Right.
So that right there could be potential
Yeah.
market access, just no one else doing it over there.
Yeah. I do have market access because I work at the farm on Central, and the owner of that farm is super creative about marketing, and we can sell things at their market bus. So
Cool.
that's really a helpful nugget of information. I love that. All of this has been super helpful. I've added that link to a resource that I've got. So what steps, other than, looking for we'll wrap up here really quickly, but I just wanted to find out what were the site assessment and creating a site plan is kind of the key thing. You're trying to plant the right plant in the right place, making sure that they thrive. You were talking about sun requirements and focusing on finding your northeast slope for the medicinal herbs. But what steps do you recommend for creating an overall site plan for the forest farm?
Well, I think a great step, if you haven't taken it already, this would go for anybody that had this interest, would be to walk your property and just simply pay close attention to what you're seeing. And so everything from kind of what we talked about, like things like, the aspect and orientation of the property, to noticing things like, identifying your riparian areas, identifying your, areas where you're maybe seeing some actual, I don't know how many rocks you're going to see in Dayton. It's pretty glaciated there, but and then down to, the next step would be species identification, which, depending on your familiarity, with native species, can be something you might be able to do yourself, or, like that's a service that Rural Action offers. You may be able to find folks kind of in your area that can do that. But those plants are really kind of telling you what's going on in terms of the site conditions. And that's going to, really give you the information you need to think about what you could grow there and what you could do. And so I think really that's a really important step, is to become familiar with your landscape. In an ideal, forest farming situation, you really don't have to do too much in terms of site preparation. But I think also paying attention to, are you seeing invasive species, and trying to get even if it's just a qualitative sense of the health of the forest, where you're interested in growing stuff, because invasives can definitely, put a halt to some of your ambitious plans. Instead, it can be maybe the first step, even if that's not something you want to think about or have to deal with. And in forest farming, I think we often picture it, or I'll speak for myself, on really pristine, beautiful sites with all these native species, and they're growing really well. But in a lot of cases, forest farming can also be a way to rehabilitate an otherwise degraded site. And so step one might be invasives removal, and step two might be introducing some of these plants. And so there could be some site preparation required too. And that's where maybe you aren't seeing the native species that would tell you this is going to be a perfect site for ginseng or a great place to plant my pawpaw trees. But that's where you want to think, if I'm on a northeast facing slope and it seems like a relatively fertile site, but it's loaded with honeysuckle or something, step one would be to deal with those invasives, a little bit of site preparation, and then you could get into the business of doing some planting. Yeah. What am I missing, Andrea? What else might you want to do?
I would just add that before doing any soil sort of amendment, maybe definitely get a soil test first. If you're planning on doing any sort of, substantial amendment, maybe get a soil test. Karam, would that be?
Yeah, it's always a great way to just learn more about what's going on. And when we're saying fertile, we're throwing that idea around, and you can look at the plants that are growing there, but a soil test is a great way to get quantitative about it and look at the, one in particular, one of the nutrients that is often associated with the growth and success of understory plants, and things like pawpaw, I'd be willing to bet would respond to, is calcium, available soil calcium. And so a soil test would give you some quantitative numbers to just help you make some of these judgment calls. So that's definitely a good idea.
Okay, great. We did do a soil test. We've been working with Central Central State Agricultural Extension. So,
Cool.
so yeah, so I'll take a deeper dive into that. So I think we're going to need to wrap things up, but I'm hoping we can continue to have conversations in the future. I don't want to, keep this go too much longer than that we said we would. In the future, I would love to talk more about maybe resources that you recommend or curriculum materials. I don't know if maybe in a minute, if there are things that you'd want to share, you could email and I could tell anybody that's watching this where the resource page is. But are there any quick things that you think we should make sure we include as far as resources for learning more?
We have quite a few on our website, and there's a lot that I have saved on my computer that I send to landowners that I can share with you as well. But Cornell Extension is a really great resource. Penn State Extension is also another great resource. They have really great invasive species plant fact sheets, which are super helpful. They've also got some forest farming stuff as well. But those would be the top two extensions that I would recommend. Oh, and sorry, NC State as well, North Carolina State. Got a lot of great info there.
Nice. All right.
The other one was real quick, just another option for you is there's a forest farming YouTube channel that has they've got so many videos that are so helpful that are often like crop specific. Some are, it's like they'll, a video on an overview of what forest farming is, and then other videos it's like how to grow elderberry, how to grow wasabi, for example, in your forest, and different options. So that's an awesome one because it's also visual for people that are visual learners. You can see people actually putting plants in the ground or dividing roots to transplant them. There's some really great stuff on that YouTube channel.
Amazing. Would you be able to send me the link to that forest farming YouTube channel?
Yeah, I put it in the chat, but
You did.
it seems like maybe it would make sense for us to just kind of send you
Yeah.
a bunch of things and then you can share them that way.
And then we can put that on the website. Well, thank you both so very much for taking the time to meet with me and sharing this information. We're going to continue to be in touch with you because hopefully we'll be able to do a ginseng planting. So we'll reach out to you for resources and maybe be purchasing some seed from Rural Action. But really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for meeting with me here and sharing.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, we'll be in touch and I'll look out for those things. And for those of you that are watching this recording, please go to elder-tree.org if you want to sign up and get involved, and you can find out about upcoming forest farming workshops and how you can help out. All right. Well, thank you guys.
Okay. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.